The desert wind was blowing hard that night in July 1995. Officer Miguel Rodriguez pulled his patrol truck to a stop along the dusty border road near Nogales, Arizona. He had been working the night shift for 8 years now, and he knew this stretch of desert like the back of his hand. But something felt different tonight. Something was wrong. Miguel was 34 years old, married to his high school sweetheart Isabella, and father to 2 young kids. He wasn't the type of guy who took unnecessary risks. His fellow officers always said he was the most careful and thorough person they knew. When Miguel said something was suspicious, people listened. He had a nose for trouble that had saved lives more than once. For the past 3 weeks, Miguel had noticed strange things happening in his patrol sector. Vehicles that didn't belong there, tire tracks that appeared overnight in places where no one should be driving, radio chatter that stopped suddenly when he approached certain areas. It was like someone was always one step ahead of him, always watching. That evening, Miguel had kissed Isabella goodbye as usual. She was making dinner for the kids when he left for work. "Be careful out there," she had said, like she did every night. But this time she held onto his hand a little longer. Maybe she sensed something too. At the Border Patrol station, the night briefing was routine. Supervisor Captain Mitchell went through the usual warnings about drug smugglers and people crossing illegally. But Miguel noticed that Mitchell avoided looking at him directly. It was strange, considering they had worked together for 5 years. Mitchell had even been to Miguel's house for barbecues with the family. Miguel started his patrol route at sunset. The Arizona desert stretched out endlessly in all directions, painted orange and red by the dying light. This was dangerous country. Rattlesnakes, scorpions, and temperatures that could kill a person in hours. But Miguel loved this job. He believed he was protecting his community and his country. Around 9 o'clock, Miguel's radio crackled to life. Another officer was reporting suspicious activity near the old water tower, about 15 miles from Miguel's position. Miguel turned his truck toward the location, driving carefully on the rocky desert road. His headlights cut through the darkness as he navigated between cactus and thorny bushes. When Miguel reached the water tower area, everything looked normal. Too normal. Usually there were signs of life. Animals, insects making noise, the occasional illegal crossing. But tonight, the desert was completely silent. Even the coyotes weren't howling. Miguel parked his truck and got out to investigate, on foot. He checked the area around the water tower with his flashlight, looking for footprints or evidence of recent activity. That's when he found them, fresh tire tracks that were definitely not from Border Patrol vehicles. These were from heavy trucks, the kind used for smuggling operations. Following the tracks, Miguel discovered something that made his blood run cold. Hidden behind some large rocks was a makeshift camp with supplies, food, and equipment. But this wasn't set up by people trying to cross the border illegally. This was too organized, too professional. Someone was using this location as a base of operations, and they had been here for weeks. Miguel immediately radioed his position to headquarters. "This is Unit 7 reporting suspicious activity at the old water tower. I've found evidence of organized smuggling operations, requesting backup for investigation." The radio was quiet for a long moment before Captain Mitchell's voice came through. "Unit 7, return to your regular patrol route. We'll handle the investigation." Something about Mitchell's tone bothered Miguel. It was too quick, too dismissive. Miguel had found evidence of a major smuggling operation, and his supervisor wanted him to just walk away. It didn't make sense. Instead of leaving, Miguel decided to document everything. He took photographs of the tire tracks, the hidden camp, and all the equipment. He wrote detailed notes in his personal journal, something he had started doing recently because of all the strange incidents in his sector. Miguel was finishing his documentation. He heard vehicles approaching, multiple vehicles moving fast across the desert without headlights. Miguel quickly turned off his flashlight and hid behind his patrol truck. 3 large trucks passed by his position, heading toward the Mexican border. They were loaded with cargo and moving like they knew exactly where they were going. Miguel tried to follow the trucks, but they were too far ahead and moving too fast for him to catch up safely in the dark. He did manage to get close enough to see that they were heading toward a section of the border fence that was supposed to be heavily monitored. Yet somehow these trucks were moving through the area like they owned it. Back at his truck, Miguel tried radioing headquarters again. Unit 7 to base. I've observed 3 large vehicles heading toward the border in Sector 5. They appear to be carrying cargo and avoiding our checkpoint locations. Again, Captain Mitchell responded immediately. Unit 7, your shift is ending early tonight. Return to base for debriefing. Miguel checked his watch. It was only 11:30 p.m. His shift wasn't supposed to end until 6 a.m. Something was definitely wrong. But Miguel was a good soldier, and he followed orders. He started driving back toward headquarters, his mind racing with questions. On the way back, Miguel made one final radio call at 11:47 p.m., reporting his position as he had been trained to do. Unit 7 checking in from mile marker 42, heading back to base as ordered. Copy that, Unit 7, came the response from the dispatcher. Those would be the last words anyone would hear from Miguel Rodriguez. The next morning, when Miguel didn't come home from his shift, Isabella called the Border Patrol station. Captain Mitchell told her that Miguel had completed his shift and left the building around midnight. But Miguel never made it home. His truck was found 3 miles from where he had made his last radio call, abandoned on a lonely desert road, with the engine still running and the driver's door wide open. When the sun came up on July 16, 1995, and Miguel Rodriguez was nowhere to be found, the Border Patrol launched the biggest search operation in the agency's history. Within hours, the desert was filled with helicopters, search dogs, and dozens of agents combing through every inch of the harsh terrain. Isabella Rodriguez stood at the command post they had set up near where Miguel's truck was found, watching the organized chaos of the search effort. She was holding their 6-year-old son, Carlos, while their 4-year-old daughter, Maria, played nearby, too young to understand why Mommy was crying. Isabella kept expecting Miguel to walk out from behind, a cactus smiling and explaining where he had been, but as the hours passed, that hope began to fade. The search teams found Miguel's truck in a strange condition. The keys were still in the ignition, the engine was running, and his radio was working perfectly. His gun was still in its holster. His badge was pinned to his uniform shirt hanging on the seat, and his wallet with family photos and $43 was untouched. Nothing was missing except Miguel himself. Captain Mitchell personally led the search efforts, and to everyone watching, he seemed just as concerned as anybody else. He worked 18-hour days, coordinated with helicopters, and even got on his hands and knees searching through thorny bushes. Nobody suspected that the man leading the search might know more than he was letting on. By the 3rd day, FBI agents arrived from Phoenix to take over the investigation. Agent Patricia Williams was assigned as the lead investigator. She was known for her thorough approach and her ability to see details that others missed. When she examined Miguel's truck, she found something the Border Patrol had overlooked: tiny drops of blood on the driver's seat that were almost invisible. The blood was tested and confirmed to be Miguel's. This changed everything. What had started as a missing person case was now potentially a homicide investigation. Agent Williams began interviewing everyone who had worked with Miguel, starting with his partner and supervisor. During these interviews, a disturbing picture began to emerge. Several agents mentioned that Miguel had been asking a lot of questions lately about unusual activity in his patrol sector. He had been staying late after shifts, studying maps and radio logs. Some said he seemed worried about something but wouldn't talk about what it was. Isabella told Agent Williams about the phone calls Miguel had been receiving at home in the weeks before he disappeared. The calls would come at odd hours, and when Miguel answered, the person on the other end would hang up without saying anything. Miguel had tried to brush it off, telling Isabella it was probably just wrong numbers, but she could see it was bothering him more than he wanted to admit. He was writing things down, Isabella told Agent Williams during one of their conversations. Miguel started keeping a journal or notebook. He would write in it after work, but he kept it private. I respected that because I knew his job was stressful, and maybe writing helped him deal with things. Agent Williams asked to search the house for this journal, but it was nowhere to be found. Miguel's personal vehicle, his desk at work, even His locker had been thoroughly searched. The journal had disappeared just like Miguel had. The investigation expanded to include Miguel's recent activities and cases. Agent Williams discovered that in the 2 months before his disappearance, Miguel had filed several reports about suspicious vehicle sightings and possible smuggling routes. He had also requested additional surveillance equipment for his sector and asked for backup on several occasions when following up on suspicious activity. What made these requests unusual was that other agents working nearby sectors hadn't noticed the same level of suspicious activity. It was almost like the criminal activity was concentrated specifically in Miguel's patrol area, which didn't make sense from a tactical standpoint. 3 weeks into the investigation, Agent Williams interviewed a local ranch worker named Diego, who had known Miguel personally. Diego revealed something that made her blood run cold. He had seen Miguel's patrol truck parked near the old water tower on the night he disappeared, and there had been other vehicles there too. Vehicles that didn't look like they belonged to Border Patrol. "I was checking on our cattle that night," Diego explained. "I saw the lights from maybe a mile away. There were at least 3 or 4 vehicles and they weren't using headlights like they were trying to hide. Officer Rodriguez's truck was there, but so were these big trucks that looked like they were carrying cargo." Diego hadn't reported this earlier because he was afraid of getting involved in Border Patrol business. But as the investigation continued, and Miguel remained missing, his conscience wouldn't let him stay quiet any longer. This information led Agent Williams to focus on the possibility that Miguel had stumbled onto a smuggling operation. The timing made sense. Miguel had been investigating suspicious activity in the same area where Diego had seen the mysterious vehicles. But if Miguel had discovered smugglers, why hadn't he called for backup? And why would they take him instead of just avoiding the area? The investigation took another dark turn when Agent Williams began looking more closely at internal Border Patrol communications from the night Miguel disappeared. She discovered that there had been several radio transmissions that were not logged in the official records. Someone had been communicating on Border Patrol frequencies, but these conversations had been deliberately left out of the permanent records. Working with technical specialists, Agent Williams was able to partially reconstruct some of these missing communications. What she found was shocking. There had been radio chatter about clearing the route and handling the problem at almost the exact time Miguel had made his final check-in call. The investigation was now focusing on the possibility that Miguel's disappearance was connected to corruption within the Border Patrol itself. This was a sensitive and dangerous area to investigate. Agent Williams knew that if there were corrupt agents involved, they would be watching her investigation closely and might try to interfere with or sabotage her work. Meanwhile, the search for Miguel's body continued. Search teams covered over 500 square miles of desert, using ground-penetrating radar, cadaver dogs, and even consulting with local Native American trackers who knew the desert better than anyone. They found old bones from animals, abandoned camps from people who had crossed the border illegally, and even some artifacts from the Old West. But no trace of Miguel Rodriguez. As months passed, the case began to receive less attention from the media and the public. Other stories took over the news and the search teams were reassigned to other duties. But Agent Williams refused to give up. She had become personally invested in finding out what happened to Miguel, partly because she suspected that his disappearance was connected to a much larger and more dangerous conspiracy. Isabella Rodriguez also refused to give up hope. She organized volunteer search parties on weekends, distributed flyers with Miguel's photograph throughout Arizona and northern Mexico, and even hired a private investigator with her own money. She appeared on local television shows and radio programs, pleading for anyone with information to come forward. The case was slowly going cold, but the questions Agent Williams had uncovered were not going away. Someone had been communicating on Border Patrol radios without proper authorization. Miguel had been investigating suspicious activity that other agents hadn't noticed. And most troubling of all, Miguel's personal journal documenting his concerns had vanished without a trace. By the end of 1995, the official search for Miguel Rodriguez was suspended. The FBI kept the case open, but without new leads, there wasn't much more they could do. Agent Williams was reassigned to other cases, but she kept Miguel's file on her desk and continued reviewing it whenever she had spare time. The years that followed Miguel Rodriguez's disappearance were difficult ones for everyone who knew him. Isabella had to learn how to be a single mother while never knowing if her husband was alive or dead. She couldn't move on with her life, but she couldn't keep hoping forever either. It was a terrible kind of limbo that affected every decision she made. Little Carlos and Maria grew up asking questions about their father that Isabella couldn't answer. Carlos, now old enough to understand that Daddy wasn't coming home, became angry and withdrawn. Maria, still too young to fully grasp the situation, would sometimes set a place for her father at dinner and ask when he was coming home from work. Isabella found strength she didn't know she had. She went back to school to become a paralegal, so she could better understand the legal system and help other families going through similar situations. She started a support group for families of missing federal agents, discovering that there were more cases like Miguel's than most people realized. The support group met every month in the basement of a local church. There was Helen, whose DEA agent husband had vanished during an undercover operation in 1992. There was Robert, whose Border Patrol agent's son had disappeared near El Paso in 1994. And there was Carmen, whose customs agent brother had gone missing at a checkpoint in California just 6 months after Miguel disappeared. What struck Isabella about these cases was how similar they all were. These weren't agents who had gotten lost or had accidents. These were experienced, careful people who had simply vanished without a trace, often while investigating suspicious activity. And in every case, the official investigations had eventually gone cold. Agent Patricia Williams stayed in touch with Isabella even after being reassigned to other cases. They would meet for coffee every few months, and Williams would update Isabella on any developments in Miguel's case. Unfortunately, there were very few developments to report. However, Williams had not stopped investigating entirely. In her spare time, she continued to research the corruption angle that had emerged during the original investigation. She had quietly begun looking into other Border Patrol cases where agents had reported suspicious activity or filed complaints about unusual incidents. What Williams discovered was troubling. Over the past 5 years, there had been at least 7 Border Patrol agents who had reported concerns about possible internal corruption or suspicious activities by their colleagues. 3 of these agents had been transferred to different locations shortly after making their reports. 2 had been reassigned to desk jobs. 1 had been fired for alleged policy violations, and 1 was Miguel Rodriguez, who had simply disappeared. Williams also noticed patterns in the areas where these incidents occurred. Most of them were concentrated in 3 specific Border Patrol sectors, all of which were known for heavy drug trafficking activity. And in all 3 sectors, the supervising captain had been in their position for more than 5 years, giving them significant influence over operations and personnel decisions. One of these captains was Mitchell, Miguel's former supervisor. Williams began quietly investigating Mitchell's background and activities. What she found was a man who lived well beyond what his government salary should have allowed. Mitchell owned a large house, expensive vehicles, and took frequent vacations to expensive resorts. When Williams tried to dig deeper into Mitchell's finances, she found that much of his wealth appeared to come from consulting work and investments. But the companies he claimed to work for were difficult to trace, and some appeared to exist only on paper. Williams knew she was walking into dangerous territory. If Mitchell was indeed corrupt and connected to Miguel's disappearance, then investigating him openly could put her own life at risk. She decided to proceed very carefully, documenting everything and keeping copies of her research in multiple secure locations. Meanwhile, life went on in the Border Patrol. New agents were hired and trained. Technology improved. Policies were updated. But the fundamental problems that may have led to Miguel's disappearance remained unchanged. The same people were in charge, the same systems were in place, and the same opportunities for corruption existed. Isabella often drove out to the desert where Miguel's truck had been found. She would sit there for hours, hoping that being in that place might somehow help her understand what had happened. Sometimes she brought the children who would play in the sand while she remembered better times. On one of these visits, Isabella met an elderly man named Eduardo who lived on a small ranch nearby. Eduardo had known Miguel professionally and personally, and he shared some disturbing observations with Isabella. "Your husband was a good man," Eduardo told her, "but he was asking too many questions about things that some people didn't want questioned. There are people who make a lot of money from the chaos at the border, and they don't like it when honest agents try to interfere with their business." Eduardo explained that he had lived in the area for 60 years and had seen changes in how the border was patrolled. In the old days, he said, corruption was rare because the community was small and everyone knew everyone else. But as drug money became involved and operations became more sophisticated, opportunities for corruption had multiplied. "I'm not saying anyone in the Border Patrol is corrupt," Eduardo said carefully, "but I am saying that when there's that much money involved, good people can sometimes make bad choices, and people who ask too many questions sometimes find themselves in trouble." Isabella found Eduardo's observations both helpful and frightening. They confirmed her growing suspicion that Miguel's disappearance was connected to his work, but they also suggested that finding the truth might be more dangerous than she had realized. As the late 1990s turned into the early 2000s, Isabella noticed changes in how Border Patrol agents talked about Miguel's case. In the first couple of years after his disappearance, agents would openly discuss the case and share their theories about what might have happened. But gradually, people became less willing to talk about it. When Isabella attended Border Patrol events or met with Miguel's former colleagues, she sensed that people were uncomfortable discussing the case. Some agents would change the subject when she brought it up. Others would give vague, non-committal responses. It was as if the entire organization had decided that Miguel's disappearance was better left unexamined. This change in attitude troubled Isabella because it suggested that people knew more than they were saying. Whether they knew specific details about what had happened to Miguel, or they simply knew that asking questions about his disappearance was discouraged, their silence was preventing the truth from coming out. By 2003, 8 years after Miguel's disappearance, Isabella had to accept that the case was effectively closed. Agent Williams had been promoted and transferred to Washington, D.C. The FBI file on Miguel's case was gathering dust in a storage room. The Border Patrol had moved on to other concerns. But Isabella never stopped believing that someday, somehow, the truth about what happened to her husband would come to light. She kept all of Miguel's personal belongings exactly as he had left them. She saved every newspaper article about his case. She maintained contact with the other families in her support group, sharing information and keeping each other's hopes alive. Little did Isabella know that changes were already underway in the federal government that would eventually lead to new discoveries about Miguel's case. The September 11th attacks had created momentum for reorganizing federal law enforcement agencies, and this reorganization would soon uncover evidence that had been hidden for years. In 2003, the United States government created the Department of Homeland Security, bringing together multiple agencies, including the Border Patrol, under one large organization. This massive reorganization meant that thousands of files, evidence boxes, and records had to be reviewed, cataloged, and transferred between different offices and storage facilities. Agent Jennifer Martinez was assigned to the task force responsible for reviewing old Border Patrol cases as part of this transition. Martinez was a detail-oriented investigator who had built her career on solving cold cases that other agents had given up on. She approached each file with fresh eyes, looking for connections and evidence that might have been overlooked. When Martinez opened the file on Miguel Rodriguez's disappearance, she was immediately struck by how thorough the original investigation had been. Agent Williams had documented everything carefully and had clearly spent enormous amounts of time and effort trying to solve the case. But Martinez noticed something that seemed odd. There were references throughout the file to Miguel's personal journal, but the journal itself was nowhere to be found. Martinez began tracking down everyone who had been involved in the original investigation. She interviewed the agents who had searched Miguel's home, his vehicle, and his workplace. She spoke with the evidence technicians who had processed his patrol truck. She even contacted Agent Williams, now working in FBI headquarters in Washington. What Martinez discovered was troubling. Everyone remembered Miguel having a personal journal or notebook. Several people had seen him writing in it. Isabella had specifically mentioned it to investigators, but somehow this crucial piece of evidence had never been located or properly documented. Martinez decided to conduct a comprehensive search of all Border Patrol facilities and storage areas in the region where Miguel had worked. This was a massive undertaking that required reviewing thousands of evidence boxes and file cabinets, many of which hadn't been opened in years. 3 months into this search, Martinez made a discovery that would change everything. In a neglected storage room in the basement of the Border Patrol Regional Headquarters, she found a box labeled with Miguel's case number. The box had been misfiled and forgotten, stored behind other boxes in a corner where it had collected dust for nearly 9 years. Inside the box, Martinez found Miguel's personal journal. The journal was a standard composition notebook that Miguel had been using to document his observations and concerns about activities in his patrol sector. The entries began about 3 months before his disappearance and continued right up until the day he vanished. Reading through Miguel's journal, Martinez felt her heart racing. Miguel had documented a systematic pattern of corruption within his Border Patrol sector that was far more extensive than anyone had imagined. He had recorded license plate numbers, dates, times, and detailed descriptions of suspicious activities involving Border Patrol vehicles and personnel. According to Miguel's entries, certain Border Patrol agents were coordinating with smuggling operations, providing advance warning of patrol schedules and safe routes for illegal border crossings. The operation involved not just individual corrupt agents, but an organized network that included supervisors and possibly officials at even higher levels. Most shocking of all, Miguel had identified specific individuals involved in the corruption, including his own supervisor, Captain Mitchell. The journal contained detailed records of meetings, financial transactions, and communications between Border Patrol personnel and known criminal organizations. Miguel's final entry, dated the day he disappeared, was particularly chilling. "I have enough evidence now to expose the entire operation. Tomorrow I'm going to contact Internal Affairs and the FBI. I've hidden copies of everything in a safe location. If something happens to me, Isabella knows where to look." Martinez immediately tried to contact Isabella to ask about the location Miguel had mentioned, but Isabella had no idea what he was referring to. She and Miguel had never discussed hiding evidence, and she had never found any hidden documents or copies of his journal. This led Martinez to suspect that Miguel might have been killed before he could hide the evidence he mentioned, or that the location had been discovered and the evidence removed by the people he was trying to expose. Martinez knew she was now holding explosive evidence that could solve not only Miguel's disappearance, but also expose a major corruption scandal within the Border Patrol. However, she also knew that some of the people named in Miguel's journal might still be working in the organization, possibly in positions where they could interfere with or sabotage her investigation. Martinez made the decision to work completely outside normal channels. Instead of reporting her discovery to her immediate supervisors, she contacted FBI headquarters directly and requested a meeting with the highest levels of law enforcement. She also made multiple copies of Miguel's journal and stored them in different secure locations. Within a week, Martinez found herself in a conference room in Washington, D.C., presenting Miguel's journal to a task force that included representatives from the FBI, Internal Affairs, and the highest levels of the Department of Homeland Security. The reaction was immediate and dramatic. Operation Desert Justice was launched within days. This was a coordinated investigation involving multiple agencies and designed to expose the entire corruption network that Miguel had discovered. The operation had to be conducted in complete secrecy because some of the suspects were still working in positions where they could learn about the investigation and either destroy evidence or flee. The task force began by conducting surveillance on the individuals named in Miguel's journal. They discovered that many of these people were still active in the Border Patrol, and several had actually been promoted to higher positions since Miguel's disappearance. This suggested that the corruption network had been successful in protecting its members and continuing its operations. Financial investigations revealed that several Border Patrol agents and supervisors had been living far beyond their means for years. Bank records showed large cash deposits, expensive purchases, and lifestyle changes that couldn't be explained by their government salaries. Some had used their illegal income to buy properties, luxury vehicles, and make investments. Phone records and surveillance revealed that these individuals were still in contact with known criminal organizations involved in drug trafficking and human smuggling. The corruption network that Miguel had discovered in 1995 had not only continued operating but had actually expanded and become more sophisticated. Most disturbing of all, the investigation revealed that Miguel's disappearance had not been the only incident connected to this corruption network. 2 other Border Patrol agents who had asked questions or reported suspicious activities had been transferred, demoted, or forced to resign. The network had a system for dealing with potential threats that ranged from intimidation to, in Miguel's case, elimination. As the investigation progressed, it became clear that Miguel Rodriguez had been murdered because he had gotten too close to exposing a criminal conspiracy that involved millions of dollars and extended to the highest levels of his Border Patrol sector. His personal journal was the key evidence that would finally bring his killers to justice and expose a level of corruption that shocked even experienced federal investigators. The case that had been cold for 9 years was suddenly red hot, and the people responsible for Miguel's disappearance were about to face the consequences of their crimes. The arrests began at dawn on a cold morning in March 2005. FBI agents, working in coordination with internal affairs investigators and honest Border Patrol personnel, simultaneously executed search warrants at homes and offices across Arizona and New Mexico. The operation, which had been planned for months, was designed to prevent suspects from warning each other or destroying evidence. Captain Mitchell was arrested at his home while having coffee and reading the morning newspaper. When FBI agents showed him the search warrant, his face went white. He had been living comfortably for 9 years, believing that Miguel Rodriguez's murder had been successfully covered up. The discovery of Miguel's journal had brought his world crashing down. In total, 7 current and former Border Patrol agents were arrested that morning on charges ranging from corruption and conspiracy to murder. The arrests sent shockwaves through the Border Patrol community and made national news headlines. Agent Jennifer Martinez watched the arrests from the FBI field office, feeling a mixture of satisfaction and sadness. She was glad that justice was finally being served for Miguel Rodriguez, but she was also saddened by the extent of corruption that had been uncovered within an organization that was supposed to protect the country. Isabella Rodriguez received a phone call from Agent Martinez at 7 in the morning, just as the arrests were being made. "Mrs. Rodriguez," Martinez said gently, "we found your husband's journal and we've arrested the people responsible for his disappearance." Isabella had waited 9.5 years for this phone call. She had never given up hope that the truth would eventually come out, but hearing it confirmed was overwhelming. She sat down at her kitchen table and cried tears of relief, grief, and vindication all at the same time. The investigation that followed the arrests revealed the full scope of the corruption network that Miguel had discovered. The operation had been generating millions of dollars in illegal profits by accepting payments from drug cartels and human trafficking organizations. Border Patrol agents provided advance warning of raids, safe passage routes, and even direct assistance in moving illegal cargo across the border. Captain Mitchell had been the leader of this network, using his position to coordinate activities and recruit other agents. The network had operated like a business with regular meetings, profit-sharing arrangements, and systematic methods for avoiding detection. They had been incredibly careful, which explained why the corruption had continued for so long without being discovered. The evidence against the suspects was overwhelming. In addition to Miguel's journal, investigators found financial records, communication logs, and testimony from multiple witnesses. Several lower-level participants in the corruption network agreed to cooperate with prosecutors in exchange for reduced sentences, providing detailed information about how the operation worked. During the interrogations, Captain Mitchell initially denied any involvement in Miguel's disappearance, but when confronted with the specific evidence from Miguel's journal, including records of conversations and meetings that Mitchell thought no one else knew about, his story began to fall apart. The breakthrough came when investigators presented Mitchell with Miguel's final journal entry, which described a planned meeting between Mitchell and representatives from a drug trafficking organization. The meeting was supposed to take place on the night Miguel disappeared, at a location very close to where his patrol truck had been found abandoned. Faced with this evidence, and realizing that his co-conspirators were already providing information to prosecutors, Mitchell finally confessed. The story he told was chilling in its coldness and calculation. According to Mitchell's confession, Miguel had become suspicious of the unusual activity in his patrol sector and had begun investigating on his own. Mitchell had initially tried to deflect Miguel's concerns and redirect his attention to other areas, but Miguel was too thorough and persistent to be easily discouraged. When Mitchell realized that Miguel was documenting everything in his personal journal and planned to report his findings to higher authorities, he made the decision to eliminate the threat. Mitchell contacted his associates in the criminal organization and arranged for Miguel to be dealt with. On the night of July 15, 1995, Mitchell had ordered Miguel to investigate reported suspicious activity near the old water tower, knowing that the location was actually being used for a major smuggling operation. When Miguel arrived at the scene and began documenting what he found, he was confronted by armed individuals working for the trafficking organization. Miguel was murdered execution style, and his body was transported across the border into Mexico, where it was buried in an unmarked grave in the Sonoran Desert. His patrol truck was driven to the location where it was found and abandoned to make it appear that Miguel had simply vanished. Mitchell's confession led investigators to the location where Miguel's remains had been buried. Working with Mexican authorities, forensic teams recovered what was left of Miguel Rodriguez and confirmed his identity through dental records and other evidence. The recovery of Miguel's remains provided closure for Isabella and her children, who were now teenagers. They were able to hold a proper funeral and lay Miguel to rest in a cemetery near their home. The service was attended by hundreds of Border Patrol agents, FBI personnel, and community members who wanted to honor Miguel's memory. During the funeral, Isabella spoke about her husband's courage and integrity. Miguel died because he refused to look the other way when he saw corruption and wrongdoing, she said. He believed in doing the right thing, even when it was dangerous. His sacrifice has made our community safer and our government more honest. The corruption scandal led to major reforms within the Border Patrol and other federal law enforcement agencies. New oversight mechanisms were put in place, whistleblower protections were strengthened, and procedures for investigating internal corruption were improved. Miguel's case became a training example for new agents, illustrating both the importance of integrity and the dangers of corruption. Captain Mitchell and his co-conspirators received lengthy prison sentences. Mitchell himself was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole for his role in Miguel's murder and the broader conspiracy. Several other participants received sentences ranging from 15 to 30 years. Isabella Rodriguez became an advocate for federal agent safety and government accountability. She worked with other families of agents who had been killed or disappeared in the line of duty, helping to establish support services and push for policy changes. She also remarried several years later to a man who understood and respected her commitment to Miguel's memory and the causes she supported. Miguel Rodriguez was posthumously awarded the Border Patrol's highest honor for courage and integrity. His name was added to the wall of fallen agents at Border Patrol headquarters, and a training facility was named in his honor. More importantly, his sacrifice led to changes that made it harder for corruption to take root and flourish within federal law enforcement agencies. The case of Miguel Rodriguez demonstrated that even when powerful people try to cover up their crimes, the truth eventually comes to light. It took 9 years, but justice was finally served, and Miguel's courage in standing up to corruption was vindicated. His story serves as a reminder that integrity and honesty are worth fighting for, even when the cost is high.